We're ready to start now, and welcome to this RARPA webinar. My name is Jane Raglas, and I'll be talking you through the presentation. As I've just explained, if you've got any questions, please type them in, and I'll be talking for roughly 40 minutes, which gives us 20 minutes at the end to go through and answer any questions that you might have. So, just to go through the format of what we're going to be doing, I'll be going through what is RARPA, and just looking at why do we use it, why is it important, going through the 5 stages of RARPA. Then I'm going to be sharing with you some tools and resources that we've developed as we've been along our journey, and then give a summary which will be followed by the questions. So hopefully by the end of today, you will have advice, guidance and help on creating some practical tips to give yourselves an effective, robust and learner-centred provision for RARPA within an FE setting. I'd like to emphasise the learner-centred part, because this really is the key to RARPA success. It really is the key to learner success and learner progress, and there will be a lot of focus on this as we go along. Our objectives today are going to be to support you to assess the effectiveness of your own provision and how it fits within a robust RARPA process. It will give you the knowledge to create this provision, to meet all RARPA criteria, have a good, robust quality control system in place, and also, again, learner-led, learner-focused. And I'll be demonstrating, as I said before, tools and resources to enable you to get your students to take ownership of development and engage them in the learning. Because as I've said before, this is the key bit. We want our learners to know where they're going, know what their aspirations are, know what their journey is, and be on that journey with us facilitating that for them. So, what is RARPA and why do we use it? Well, what does RARPA stand for? I'm sure everybody knows this: recognising and recording progress and achievement in non-accredited learning. This can stand together with qualifications that you currently use, or it can stand alone. It is a very flexible process, but a process that's very robust in how we put it together. As you probably know, there's 5 basic stages for RARPA. And the first one is identifying appropriate learning aims, followed by initial assessments. From the initial assessments, we'll be setting challenging learning objectives. From the objectives, we'll be making formative assessments. And then at the end, a summative assessment of progress. So this is the whole thing. We're going to break it down very shortly and have a look at how it all fits together. But why use RARPA? Well, with the recent acts that have come in, the Children's and Families Act 2014, the introduction of the Education Healthcare Plans, the SEND Code of Practice and study programmes, it's been recognised that we encourage the use of non-accredited learning where appropriate. The emphasis now for our learners is more on the outcomes rather than accreditation. How are we going to get this young person to meet their aspirations? How are we going to get them to realise their full potential? And it is looking at developing that, putting it into a clear structure of progression that we can actually realise these aspirations. And also with the funding for adult learning being available for non-qualification provision, then this can, when it best meets learners' needs and those of the employers. We also need to look at preparing for adulthood and the four outcomes to that there is, looking at community engagement, working towards employment, becoming a more independent person, and encouraging good health. So all of these components together have really brought RARPA to the fore from when it was first thought of in, I think it was 2002 when it first became together. It will help us bring rigour to our systems that we currently use. With our learners, we're always working on developing their soft skills, aren't we? Some of the actual accreditation, what they're working on, is a vehicle to get them to come to college and engage them. But perhaps what we're looking at in the learners is how we're going to get them to where they want to be. You might have someone that's going to be on a hair and beauty course in the future, wants to be a hairdresser, but currently they haven't got the skills to enable them to get on that program. It obviously could be their English and maths that's stopping them, and we will be working that. But it could be other skills around their organisational, their independent skills, becoming a more independent traveller. It could also be looking at their timekeeping. And this is what we are working with the learners to prepare them for that progression onwards and for that progression to be successful. So you could use it on its own, or as I said before, in combination with qualifications. I could just give a couple of examples here. You can use it when learners need to develop social or communication skills or independent skills, where progress is more appropriately recognised through non-accredited learning than accredited learning. It could also be used to progress within work experience, where there's very individualised learning taking place to enable them. And again, with supported internships where the learning is individual because they're working towards a certain vocation or vocational area or jobs that they need the skills for. Again, why use RARPA? Well, Nigel Evans, who is Ofsted's National Lead for High Needs Learning, said at a conference at AOSEC last winter that I was at, that Ofsted often find RARPA is a key weakness in inspection. When it's robust, which is what we're going to be working towards and looking at today, it is effective. And when it's used, it's underused, he said, and when it is well used, it's a very effective tool. And this is what we need to be looking at to make it rigorous and robust and effective for our learners. Above all, RARPA will enable us to give our learners ownership of their learning, to really own those targets, make them their own, and hope they will be part of devising the targets. Ideally, when you have learner reviews, they would come up with the targets themselves, because most of us know where we want to be and how we should be getting there. We just sometimes need encouragement away on that journey. So I'm now going to go through the 5 stages of RARPA. And just give you some ideas that you may not have thought about, just broaden perhaps what you're already doing. And we'll start with looking at the aims appropriate to the learner. Do your course aims currently enable a learner to progress to where they want to be? Do you get, are your courses, the aims of those courses, are they the vehicle for your learners? Do you give clear advice and guidance about your courses? Is there the opportunity within your programs for learners to reach their aspirations? As I gave the example for the hair and beauty, you might not be delivering at that level yet, but you're working towards that. So in order for the learners to reach their aspiration, they would need to improve their organisational skills, improve their timekeeping, and improve their confidence within our environment. Do the learners know why they're on these programs? Do they know where they're going? Do you have a clear progression pathway within your programs? Generally, when you look at education healthcare plans, they would state that a learner needs to become more independent, and then they would look at more employable skills, and then maybe moving to more of a cross-college mainstream level 1 course. Is there that clear pathway for you to discuss this with the learners and their parents and carers? And do course aims match with the aims of the learners? So what you might have for documentation for that would be obviously on your prospectus. It could be course leaflets on your website, and through meetings and discussions, and as we said, advice and guidance. So just some points for you to maybe to consider, and this will be available for you later for when you're reassessing and evaluating your own provision. Do the aims meet the learner's aspirations? Are they consistent with what is on the education healthcare plans? Do you have clear progression pathways? And how do you individualise for that learner within your study programs? How do you enable the slight differences that your individuals need to learn to progress? How do you formalise that within the programs? So moving on to the initial assessment stage, That is looking at where is the baseline, where are we going to start with our learners, looking at their prior achievements, what are they coming in with, where are we with the learners, what are their confidence levels at this stage. And I guess that what you would probably be using for your initial assessments hopefully would start way before the learners come to college, and you may be going to schools, attending year 11, 12, 13 reviews for your feeder schools, and you start to meet the learners there, meet the parents, get some idea of what their aspirations are, where they're going, and for your curriculum offer, you've then got an idea of your learners coming in. From the reviews, you'd also get the education healthcare plans to have a look through, get more information on the learner, give you a better informed information, taster sessions organised with the schools as well for the learners to come in, meet the staff, have a look round, just see how they are when they come to college, sorry. You may have school links programs where students are already coming as part of their transition, and that enables us to really make good assessments of the learners. And of course, it's not just English and maths where you may be using BKSB, but it's also your professional observations within the first few weeks, your observations at the interview, and you may do an initial assessment at interview. But what I think it's really important to remember here is that it's not a case of doing lots of paperwork of your observations and filing it away. Because I've been to colleges where I've asked about initial assessments and I've been directed to a folder where there's lots of observations, but there's no clear outcome of those observations. What needs to happen here is a clear outcome of what the observations are. So as I've said, how can you go back from when you're tracking the learning? How can you look at where the journey that they've gone? Is there clear evidence from the initial assessment of the learner's journey forward? I'd just like to give you a little example of something that happened to me a little while ago. My current role is deputy head, and I was in work one day when a lecturer phoned in sick, and we hadn't got cover for anyone that day. We had no one spare, and there wasn't much we could do to cover that class. So I said I'd cover the class, and then I found out that it was a cookery class, which isn't always my best subject. I like teaching, I like cooking at home, but I'm not terribly happy in the kitchen with our learners because it's quite a specialised area. But I was told that it was okay because it's their initial assessment period, so the lecturer would have been making assessments. And I thought here was an opportunity to try something new in assessment with a group of learners that I wasn't really very confident and didn't know that well. So I spoke to Learning Support Assistant and I said, we're just going to sit back here. We're going to ask them to make beans on toast. I've got all the requirements for that. We've got some tins of beans, we've got some bread, we've got some butter. And what I'd like us to do is give a demonstration. And these learners were high entry 1, entry 2, so they were quite used to being given a lot of support in the class. I said, we're going to demonstrate and then we're going to stand back and just watch what happens. So we demonstrated, and then we arranged the learners around the kitchen in groups of 2. Obviously, we're well aware of health and safety and would have stepped in if any unsafe actions would have been occurring. Luckily, they didn't. And we sort of tied ourselves to the chair and said, we're going to watch what happens here. Obviously, there was chaos at the beginning. People were undirected. They were trying to pour baked beans into the pan without opening the tins. They were trying to pour the beans onto the hob without a pan, and then they hadn't got a spoon to stir the beans. They were buttering the bread before they put it in the toaster. It was chaos. But gradually, some sort of order started to happen, and some people started to help other people, and other learners started to listen to what their colleague was telling them to do. And I'm not saying that the baked beans on toast were by any means edible by the end of the session, but we had got some baked beans on toast made. We had some very happy learners because they were very proud of their achievements. I had some really good observations of my starting points for these learners, of those that who did respond well to being given instruction and following it, so those that couldn't really do that, and to learners that was also responded well in helping less able learners. So I felt that I just wanted to give you that example, because sometimes we want to help and we want to be proactive, and there are occasions when it's good to step back and just watch what's happening to get a baseline assessment. Anyway, I digress. So moving back to the next part, identifying appropriately challenging learning objectives. This is all about our target setting, and we've got our long-term targets of where the learner wants to be, which would be perhaps, if I go back to the hair and beauty idea, to be a hairdresser, our learner wants to be on the hair and beauty course at level 1, and we'd say in 2 or 3 years' time, so that's a long-term goal. The medium-term goal would be to be successful on this current program and meet all her objectives so that she can move on to the next program. And then the short term is breaking it into milestones, manageable stages for the learner, challenging learning objectives that we're going to be measuring and tracking. So they need to be ambitious but achievable, and basically, and very crucially, learner owned. So as I said, in my current practice, we have reviews after 6 weeks when we made our observations, and then we agree the targets with the learner and parents and carers if they've attended, which we very much encourage them to do so. And then we give the learners their targets and make them responsible. I will show you, when I'm showing you the resources, how we do that. So what to consider on these? Do the learning objectives enable a learner, work the learner towards meeting their aims? Are their views and aspirations taken into part of this? How do we evidence that these learning objectives are the right ones for that learner? And when we go through our quality control cycle, then I'll discuss that with you and tell you how we do that. And are objectives sufficiently challenging? Sometimes we don't know till we've set it, do we, how challenging that objective is when they've met it the next day, or they're really struggling. But that's where it's a continual cycle, isn't it? There's no set time scale on that. It's continually working through. So to me, this is the meaty bit. How do we recognize and record our learners when they're going through working towards their challenging learning objectives? Well, we make sure that we're watching the learners, that we identify the learners developing their skills. We need to be looking at how are they going to meet their targets? How do we track it? And again, I want to make this effective for everybody. So we've tried to include that within the class wherever possible. We've been through ideas where lecturers have tracked the targets, but often in a busy lesson, that becomes something that the lecturer does out of lesson. And we wanted everything to happen in the session so that learners are part of it at all times. Often learners have had targets that perhaps they weren't really aware of what they were, because they've had so many and it's so difficult to track them all. So we really wanted to make this learner focused. And how did we do that? So by the learners knowing their targets, being reminded of their targets, by the targets perhaps being displayed on the wall and being displayed on the desk. Like I said before, I'll show you how we do that. They're constantly reminded, and it's easy prompts for the lecturer to recognise that maybe, John, I've just seen you. Your target was to speak more slowly and more clearly and loudly, and you've just asked a question and demonstrated all of those points. So you stop the class, you celebrate that this is happening. You maybe ask if you can take a picture of him being successful. You make it something that the learner wants to achieve, and you want everyone else to recognise that he's achieved his target, because this is progress, this is celebration. We actually call them success selfies, because where students like to have the picture taken, and that's not for everybody obviously, we'll take a success selfie. And then I could say, fantastic, John, I'll email this photograph to you, and then when you're next in your tutorial session, you can put the photograph in whatever, whether perhaps you're doing a learning log, perhaps you're doing a diary, a PowerPoint of your progress, and then it can be put into that. So as I said, nothing is done outside of the session, away from the learner. It is all within the class and learner focused, learner based. I'm not going to go through the definitive list of all the things we can do to recognise. As I said, the learners have portfolios. They can do artwork. We have displays, projects, videos, success selfies, as I mentioned before, and PowerPoints, all different ways. So you can individualise what that learner finds the best way to demonstrate their progress. Again, just things for you to consider in this. How does it enable you to capture sometimes very significant learning? How do you do that in a class? How do you get that moment? As I said, what we've discovered is by taking a photograph or making an observation, recording it somewhere, and then sending it on to be put into their logs. How do you capture the small steps towards that target? Because maybe they haven't actually met the whole thing, because learners aren't going to meet that all the time. It's work towards, isn't it? But how do we capture the small steps towards that? How do we capture that unplanned learning that takes place that might not be a target, but it needs to be captured as well? And I think that by taking pictures, by recording, by completing observation forms within the session, that's a very good way of doing that. And lastly, how do we provide an effective basis on which to identify and plan for future learning? By giving feedback, to the learners. That's brilliant. You spoke slowly there. You spoke more loudly. That's absolutely fantastic. When you do it next time, I'd like you to ask a question using that voice, rather than just always answering the questions. Always moving them on, advising the learner how they can be more successful. So stage 5 is the end of program assessment, and this is really celebrating their achievement. It's how do we celebrate? We have a celebration of achievement event at the end of the year, which is fantastic. We're lucky enough to have a garden, and we have a barbecue. We have a success display of all the students and how far they've gone, their learner journey. We encourage the learners to have a reflection at the end. We have reviews with the parents in May to reflect on the success of this journey. Obviously, our course review and evaluation, and our own reflections as practitioners on how successful this year's gone and how we can improve the provision and move it forward. Constantly looking at what are we doing, how can we move it forward. So again, just for you to consider, how do you evidence this learning? How do you celebrate the success? How do you quality assure the whole process? And do you have an effective transition in place? Do your learners know clearly before the end of term where they're going to go? Is that planned for throughout the year? Have you individualized that into their program? Because it may be that they're transitioning out of college for whatever reason to go to work, or just to live more independently. All of these things are something that is a successful outcome for our learners, and something that we need to celebrate in the summative assessment. So that's really going through the stages, and hopefully I've given you something to think about. I'd like to share with you some of the tools that we use to really make it learner focused. First of all, some of our learners, they like to wear lanyards. So we identify the targets, put them on a piece of paper, and then laminate the piece of paper. As you can see, the one on the left is a student that needs to do a schedule. They need to follow a schedule when they come in, so they're ready to start the class. The schedule is take off your coat, put your lunchbox away, put your bag under the table, and get your water bottle out. As you can see here, that's what they're working towards. We've next got a couple of little tabs on the key rings. These learners are just working towards one thing in this particular lesson. One learner doesn't verbalize very much, so she's practicing on her social, stating social signs when she sees them, saying hello, saying thank you. And the other learner is working on his money. The beauty of these is that the learners put them on the desk. You as practitioners don't have to refer to a piece of paper to remind yourself of the learner's targets as you walk around the class, and indeed anybody that joins your class, as they walk around, they can clearly see what this learner is working on in this program. The learner can clearly identify with it, and it is just such a powerful way to remind you and prompt you when they actually meet a target. It's very simple, very effective, and the learners really like it. The key ring on the right is another example. That one's got 3 targets on, and it may be that they're working on all 3 in that session, or it may be that you want to just identify one for that learner, or they identify one. For a different group, and again, as I said, we individualize this, we discuss it with the group, how they best like to display their targets. This particular group wanted to do placemats. Some of the artwork is obviously their own. And so on a piece of A4 piece of paper, they write their targets, do a bit of artwork, write their name, and then we laminate this. They get these out at the beginning of every lesson and put them on the desk for us to see. So again, it prompts us of what their targets are. As you can see with Georgia, hers is to speak more clearly. She needs to work on measurements, speak louder, and she actually is hoping to go on a level 1 program, so we were working on her writing. Again, Lily on the right, she needs to speak more clearly. Sometimes she gets a bit uptight in lessons, so it was to go and look online or take a break when she needed it. And she's working on her spelling, so she either uses her phone or to use a dictionary. And they're just to prompt and remind, and they're nice when they're doing their work. You can walk around and just prompt them by pointing on the placemat. We've also, for some learners, we've got a target wall. They wanted to identify with a comic strip. Manga's very popular with some of our learners. So this was the sort of focus that they wanted to have. Again, it's nice for us to just walk up and prompt and say, hey, yeah, you're doing that target. Well done. Let's stop the class, clap, applaud, whatever we want to do. Recognizes that this achievement has been met. Another thing that we do, as I said before, the learners create a PowerPoint of their success. And this is just a snapshot of one of our learners' PowerPoints from last year. This is Thomas. Why I use this one is that he's got his targets, and the lecturer actually typed these because Thomas doesn't do it as working on his literacy and numeracy skills. But the lecturer has actually identified where these targets came from. So from the parent review, the diagnostic assessment, and educational healthcare plans. And that's so great for your quality control and your audits to have a look. You've got clear, lovely clear pictures there, clear picture of Thomas working towards his targets and knowing what he's going to be doing. I'd like to just show you another couple of PowerPoints very quickly. Joseph was one of our learners. He's doing a performing arts program. Some of you may recognize him. He was actually on the Undatables. So his first target was to volunteer more and be more involved in most shows. He indeed met that target, was involved in lots of shows, including being on television. What I really like about the PowerPoints is that it's very individual. We started off by having a pro forma for students to complete, and then realized that by individualizing the PowerPoint, it's so much more powerful. The learners really shine through. You can see that they've done it. I actually taught Joseph for English and maths, so he was working on his English skills. And, you know, he's put what he's done, he's learned his lines. It's just so Joseph, this one. And again, have you any unplanned achievement? And he's answered, yes, he did. He was involved in Chichester Theatre, and he won an award. And again, he was in the Undatables, which obviously wasn't planned. He did really well. And again, he's looking at what's he doing now? What's he moving on? So when we have the reviews and the parents see these PowerPoints, they just love it because they had no idea that's what their learners were doing. It really brings that home how far on the journey they've gone, and it's really powerful. I'm just going to show you another one which is a different level of learner. Just show you very quickly. This is Michelle's. As you see, totally different sort of PowerPoint. Shows that she's very girly, she loves cats. I'm just going to go through this quickly because I'm conscious of our time. She wants to become more independent, a bit about her course, and then her targets and a little photograph when she achieved them. Very simple. Got her targets. She would have had them on a keyring or something, took a photograph when they were achieved, and the lecturer sent the photograph to Michelle, so she was able to then, when it was their tutorial time, put it on this PowerPoint. The video in the middle, sorry, I'm not going to show it this time because we couldn't get the sound working on it, but it will be included in the package. It's a very short clip on someone learning how to ride a bike using RARPA structure to achieve her goal. It's only a couple of minutes long, but it's well worth a view. I just wanted to include some parent feedback because, as I said, when we show the PowerPoints or we have the learners' logs at the reviews and the annual reviews, it is powerful. You can read the feedback, and I love the learner feedback that I feel I like my targets as they are my own. Indeed, they are their own. So that's good. I just want to add a little bit here about your organisation's management information systems. We've all got them that we have to put learner targets onto, and it's making it tie in with the RARPA process. A lot of the systems enable you to upload evidence, upload photographs, upload observations, and that can be really helpful as a tracking process, especially for your quality assurance and just looking back at evidence, looking at that learner progression, how they've moved through, and it can work really well. And it's just tying the two together, I think, makes a very robust package for you. Some of the resources that you can have to help you moderate the process. I'm just going to click on this one. And that should take us to the Excellence Gateway. And if you scroll down, it tells you further down that there are some tools. I'll just find that in a minute for you. Further down. Training was... There are some tools down here that will help you look for more stuff, more information on RARPA. There's a lot of stuff on your moderation processes, looking through that, looking through the stages, and just to give you different ideas to some of the ones that I've given you here. Sorry, just need to move something across. For internal audits, we do our own personalised internal audits. When we've set the targets for the learners, about 2 weeks after them, when hopefully they've all been put on the correct systems and our lecturers have had time to compile it and make sure that all the learners have appropriate targets, we will go in and just identify a couple of learners from each programme, look at what are their targets, do they have targets, and where was the evidence from these targets got from? Was it from their education healthcare plan? As it said on Thomas's earlier, is it from a diagnostic assessment? Where did the targets come from, and how are they going to work towards the learner meeting their aspirations? We would do another audit at the next target setting about 2 weeks later, once they've all been given out, just to make sure that these targets flow through and they haven't just been picked from anywhere. Are they moving the learner on? And then there's these formal internal audit forms, which are available again on the gateway that I showed you earlier. I suggest if you're quite new to RARPA and you're starting and you've formalised your processes and you've got it all up and running, this is a really good exercise to do, just to go through all the bits to make sure that you've ticked all the boxes and got everything robust and effective and efficient and working for you. We did that, but now we do the internal audits to keep it going, make sure that our target setting is robust. And then when you feel that you'd like to, we operate a triangulation system where you might liaise with other colleges, preferably colleges nearby to you, that you would want to peer assess and peer review. And again, there's a form here for you to just evidence how they meet the criteria. Is it sufficient? And then examples of good practice or areas that might need improvement. And that's really nice. It gives you a clear network, ideally with at least 3 colleges working together to share your good practice, you know, advise each other, look at what you're doing, and just make sure that everything is there in place. It's very helpful to go through that format and just network and agree what some of the issues are as we go along this journey, and some of the ways that we have managed to sort it out and solve it. So, to summarise then, RARPA is an invaluable tool, totally invaluable to support us. It can track learner progress, it can recognise their achievement, and for us to quality assure and make sure that we are fulfilling all our obligations and criteria in our non-accredited provisions. It works best if we have a whole college approach, and that our senior management agree with this, because I think that lots of learners can benefit from this approach, not only the learners within foundation programs and supported learning. We had a little exercise when I did some presenting at another college on, if RARPA was a product, how would you sell it? And I just want to share with you some of the ideas that came up. Really amazing, realistic, purposeful activities. The 1,000-mile journey begins within a single step. And then the next one, which is my favorite, reach your potential, reach your peak with RARPA. It is all about the learner. The key to success on RARPA is that the learner totally is on board the journey. It's a journey that they want to make. They know where they're going. And through RARPA, we will get them there. As I've said, the key to success, not just the key to success, success will be there when the learner must identify with the process and the learner must be involved with it at every stage. So just before we finish and I look at some questions from you, can you just spend a couple of minutes identifying and recording on a piece of paper 2 immediate actions that you think you can take to improve and enhance your RARPA provision? If I just leave you to do that while I look through the questions. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you've done that, and I've got some questions here. First of all, will you be sent the slides? Yes, I believe it's all being sent out with notes and questions. Will all be sent out at the end of the webinar today. And also, if I can ask you at the end, you'll be directed towards the survey. It'd be really helpful if you could fill it in for us so we can look at what we can do for improving and just making sure that it works for you, for everyone that's listening. Take the first question. RARPA now has 6 stages. It includes next steps. Yes, I've got that here, which was from the Learning and Work Institute work in March 17. I only included the 5 stages for now, because I've touched on the next steps, but I really wanted to focus today on making RARPA learner-centered and how we can share the tools and resources that we've got to help you in the classroom as practitioners. We've touched on the quality cycle and the quality assurance part of it, and I've signposted you to some documents, but I'm very happy to contact people later to look at what you're doing in your next steps. But the next steps is about the quality assurance, and I think we did touch on that. But I have the document here, and it's very interesting, and it does take RARPA forward in a very positive way, which I'm really pleased about. So thank you very much for bringing that up. How much evidence do you need to keep when the learner leaves? I would suggest that you need to keep the evidence of learner PowerPoints and document their journey for at least a year, so that if there's any issues with their transition or where they've gone on, we know where they're at that stage. As far as I'm aware, there's no formal, like with a qualification where you have to keep their portfolios for 3 or 5 years. As far as I'm aware, there's no formal requirements for that. But I do think it's good practice for us to keep this documentation for at least 1 year, so that if there is any query, we can help people on their journey. Again, you put, should this just be an example, or would there be evidence for every learner? I think maybe you keep evidence for every learner, because if it is PowerPoints, it's not going to be that much evidence, and it can be all held electronically, hopefully. So it's just a case of keeping some files for a year or so. Do people record verbal feedback, and do you record this for everybody? Personally, we don't record verbal feedback at the moment. We would write it down that verbal feedback had been given. I do record this for everybody, because we would record it either on their portfolios that they were given the feedback. It might be on their PowerPoints. It could be in, a lot of us have books for the learners. These are really handy when you give feedback. I have the targets in the front of their books, and it could be their books for writing or maths or just their general work. And by having the targets at the front, it's really helpful, particularly if their targets are around writing, improving their writing, working on their work so they can go on to level 1 programs. Then they make a really good record of how they've improved, and you've got your written feedback there as a reminder and a prompt to the learner of how they can progress through. Okay. I have been asked, Ofsted are expecting to see evidence of previous learners. I can check out on that for you. I hadn't been informed about that, but if you've got information, please let me know. Maybe you've had practical experience of that. We didn't have to show evidence of that when we've had our inspection, but that's not to say that things haven't changed. So please let me know if that's the case, so we can make sure that everyone keeps evidence of previous learners. We do keep records of our learners, and we keep records of their achievements, and we do keep some of their work, but we didn't have a set time scale on that. So if you've been recently inspected and have more information, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much for that. And you will be sent a link for the slides and the recording. And I think that's all the questions at the moment, unless anyone's got anything else. No? Okay, well, thank you all very much. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you found it valuable today. I hope you've learned at least 2 things that you can take forward. And at the end, there will be contact details for me. So if you want to contact regarding anything that we've discussed today, please feel free, or anybody from part of the RARPA webinar process. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me, and good luck with your RARPA. May you develop an effective, robust and rigorous process, and may your learners all be successful.